right, good evening, everybody. Good to see you tonight. Dean brought his computer. We're ready to go now. You're doing a podcast on the broadcast? Oh, man. That's fantastic. Well, welcome back to everybody after a couple of weeks off. And I wonder, after a 2-week break, if you did your homework. Do you remember that you had homework? See, you all are more honest than the 4 o'clock group who all nodded to me like they did it and then didn't have anything to say when I asked them about it. So the question was, and the question we're going to start with tonight, after we've spent a month talking about these blessings of Jesus at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, these new perspectives that Jesus offers us, and when we live in the kingdom of God, this is what the real life is in God's kingdom. To know that that we're living in that way, what difference does it really make for us? How do these words challenge us? How are they changing us? What questions do they ask of us? And so that's what I'd ask you to think about, was kind of, okay, we hear all this, but so what? What difference does it make in our lives every day? So, when I was a kid, I rode the bus to school, and I had about a 45-minute bus ride, and I used to do a lot of homework on the bus in the morning, not in the afternoon. In the morning, going to school, trying to get it done before I got there. So, I'm going to read this passage again and pretend this is your bus ride to school, and you've got just a few minutes to do your homework, and then I'm going to ask you, what difference do you think these blessings that Jesus offers us are making in our lives? Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So what difference are those words starting to make in your life as you read them, as you think about them, as you try to apply them? How do they challenge you? What are they teaching you? Any thoughts about that? Bus ride was not long enough.
Well, I just think it's a reminder of what we need to do. We need to carry on Dennis' work.
Okay.
That's what he's telling me, that I need to think more about that.
So it's an ongoing reminder of how we're to be about the work of Jesus in the world.
Yeah.
Okay? Okay? Other thoughts? Patsy?
The one that says, I guess it's the 10th verse, happy are those who are persecuted because they are good, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're a child too on a bus,
Yeah.
that can play in a hurry.
Yeah, there was a little persecution going on from time to time.
Yeah, Troy wouldn't let us put Catherine on the bus. He's 6 years old, and he said, you are going to put that little thing on the bus. And I said, I put you on the bus.
Yeah.
But I think school sometimes can really play havoc with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And not just kids. Yeah.
A few, yeah, Mimi?
Well, I was just going to say, I look at these as a whole group,
Sure.
and they all start with blessed.
Sure. One of the things that we've talked about through this, and that somebody in the 4 o'clock session brought up, is that they are so countercultural. And I think that's what you're getting at. You read them, it says blessing, but then you read this thing, wait a minute, that's not, we wouldn't call
Wouldn't
that
say
that.
that necessarily.
Yeah, they're so counter to how we would normally act based on what our culture teaches us. You know, culture doesn't teach us that we're blessed when we mourn because we can be comforted. You know, we talked about some other ways of looking at these. It doesn't teach us that we're blessed when we're vulnerable because that allows God to work in us. No, we think of blessings as being things like strong and self-reliant and resilient and all these things. And what these Beatitudes are teaching us is the opposite of that. Learning to trust, learning to be vulnerable, learning to empty ourselves of self so that we can be filled with the presence of Christ. So it's about becoming more and more selfless. And that's a very countercultural thing to do, isn't it? Okay? Other thoughts?
You know, I was just kind of thinking, we read these in context of our culture and what we have grown up with.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is speaking this into a culture where people had a much harder time just getting by day to day
Right?
than any of us ever had.
Right?
And so it might have meant different stuff to them
Sure.
than it would to us. I mean, you know, like, as you say, you know, blessed are the meek, and we're not taught to be meek, and, you know, blessed are those who are mourning, or poor in spirit, or peacemakers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that almost doesn't exist in today's world.
Right.
It probably didn't then either.
Yeah.
But I think wherever any person's coming from, it might mean something a little bit different.
Oh, sure. And you know, it's interesting, Ben Carr, the other said almost exactly the same thing. These hit us differently depending on where we are in life and what's going on in our life at the moment and the general context of our culture.
Yeah.
And so this first one says, blessed are the poor in spirit, and those are the Anoim in the Hebrew, and it means the people of the earth. And in so many ways, those are the people sitting right there in the moment. Those people in that immediate context, these are very real blessings for them because they identify with a lot of these things. The challenge for us sometimes is we don't identify with these things. And so how do we hear the blessing of that in the same way? There's also interesting, one of our participants at 4 o'clock who shared with us that he didn't become a Christian until he was in his 70s. And so he thought, you know, I kind of learned how to behave morally in the world. I knew right from wrong and kind of thought I was a good person and did good things based on kind of a cultural understanding of what was good and what wasn't, what was right and what wasn't acceptable. He said, but then I became a Christian. I started to read these words and I realized, man, I'm missing a whole layer of this. It's not about just what we do and how we can justify or rationalize it based on some system of ethical code. It's about who we are. And this living out of this kind of blessedness. And I think for so many of us who've grown up with these words, you know, they're just there. They've been there so long. We're not challenged by them in the way we probably really should be. You know how you have that, maybe you all don't do this in your house, but you have that piece of furniture that's there, and it's been there forever, and it's been there so long you don't even know it's there until somebody moves it, and then you go, what used to be there? You don't even remember what used to be there. You just know there's dirt in that corner now that you didn't see before.
You stumble over it.
And then you heard. So I wonder sometimes that these passages like this that are so familiar, they become kind of part of the wallpaper. And we just don't, we're not challenged by them. We know they're there. We know we're supposed to be affected by them, but we don't take them seriously in our everyday life. These ought to be working on us all the time to help us be more selfless. Because that's what they're all challenging us to do, is to be emptied of self, filled with Christ, so that we can live out of that. So with that as a foundation, we've got a few more verses to get through kind of the first section of the sermon. And the first thing I want you to do here is listen to the change. Listen to what shifts as we go from these Beatitudes, these blessings, into the next set of verses. So beginning with verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So what's the first thing you notice? Coming out of these Beatitudes, shifting to these two short paragraphs, what's the first thing that stands out?
Second person.
It changes person. It is so much more direct. Instead of being this, blessed are those who, even when it says, blessed are you when, moves from that to you are. You are. So what are some of the alternatives to saying you are? I mean, what are some other ways Jesus might have said that help us to think about how important this is? Well, he doesn't say you will be. He doesn't say you might be. He doesn't say you could be. He doesn't say you must be. He doesn't say you will have. None of those are here. You are.
Ongoing.
Yeah, it's ongoing. And it's pretty much absolute, isn't it? It's not an invitation. Would you like to be? He doesn't say, would you like to be salt? Would you like to be light? He says, you are. Think again here about a little bit of what David was talking about a moment. The context of this, we're in the Galilee. It's in the first century. Palestine, Roman occupied area. These are people these are common, ordinary people trying to make it, trying to live their lives. And Jesus looks at this group of people and says, you are. You are. How can he say that? What's the basis for that? Why does Jesus look at them and say, you are these things? We'll talk about what the things are in a minute, but what's the basis for that? The audience has changed.
Look like.
You would think maybe right there that it had changed. I think it's rooted in the idea that what the Sermon on the Mount is trying to help us understand is what the preaching of Jesus says when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is near in Matthew, the kingdom of God in Luke, Mark. Because you are in the kingdom, you are the kingdom, you're the blessed of the kingdom because of all these things. Because you're in the kingdom, you are this. Jesus could say that with certainty to them because the kingdom has come. If the kingdom hadn't come, it might be, well, you could maybe hope to be these things someday. But he's saying it with certainty because of the presence of the kingdom now, because he is there, because he is the one who's saying it. Jesus can say it because Jesus has the authority to say it. And so he says, you are. So what does he say that we are? Well, he says we are salt. He says you are salt. What does salt do? Okay, salt can be a preservative. Salt can be a purifying agent. Okay? How does it do that?
Flavor.
Okay, hold on to flavor for just a second. How does salt purify something?
Taste.
Okay, we'll get to taste in a minute. How does it purify something?
It's
Act as a
create.
filter.
I'm sorry?
Does it act as a filter?
It doesn't really act as a filter, but it's a desiccant in some ways. Right.
Cleanses things.
It creates an anaerobic environment
Yes.
within something. And the key there being within something. Have you ever seen, I know some of you have, country ham curing, kind of in the wild, so to speak? You know, because we're streaming, I'm not going to say the name, but there was a place in my hometown famous for country ham. And I can remember as a kid walking by that place and thinking, there is no way I'm eating any of that. Because I don't know if you sit, but on the outside it's got mold and there are bugs and all this stuff on the outside. But the inside, because of the presence of the salt,
Deliciousness.
there's deliciousness. That is correct. Which gets us to the flavor part. How does salt flavor something? What does it do to flavor something?
It enhances whatever is there.
It enhances what is there. Generally, if we eat something that is too salted, it's not flavorful. You know, unless you're just a salt junkie. You know, it's not flavorful. It's too much. Salt's not meant for us to taste the salt. It's meant to enhance the flavor. Now, I know Mika knows this because she's a baker. You put a little salt in sweet things that you bake, don't you? Because it helps to enhance the flavor. How does it work to do that? In order for salt to be effective as a preservative or as a flavor enhancer or some of the other things we're going to talk about in a minute, it has to dissolve, doesn't it? It can't maintain itself, its form, and still function like it's supposed to in those ways. It has to dissolve. It has to penetrate. I heard that word over here a moment ago. It has to get into whatever it's doing for flavor. What if you just put salt on the outside of something, you know, it doesn't have the same effect. You taste the salt, which is why we put it on French fries last, because we want to taste the salt on the French fries. But it has that need to incorporate, and so it has to dissolve to do that. Kind of a sacrificial element to that, isn't there? It loses its shape, it loses itself, if you will, in order to perform its function. Other things. When we think about sacrificial, there's a connection to salt and sacrifice in the Old Testament. Leviticus 2:13. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings. Ezekiel 43:24. You are to offer them before the Lord, and the priests are to sprinkle salt on them and sacrifice them as a burnt offering to the Lord. Now, why do you think God is instructing the priest to salt the offering? It's a grain offering. Why are we adding salt to the offering, you think?
I don't know if this is very relevant, but I observed growing up that mommy will tell you from a distance, without tasting the food, that food is salty or not salty enough. So it looks as if beyond the enhancement, it also give it a good flavor. It improves the flavors that come from
Okay,
whatever the
yeah.
sacrifice is. Beyond that, it also purifies. If there are impurities in it, it kills them and
Mhm.
makes it clean to be acceptable.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. In both things, the idea is you want the sacrifice to be acceptable to God. And so what God's instructing them is, put a little salt on it, maybe like you would in taking care of your own food and preparing your own food. Give to me what you would give yourself. But also, I think there's a symbolic act of purification that's going on in that. It's a way of saying this needs to be pure. You know, how do you know if grain is pure or not? Well, you put salt on it, it purifies it. And it may also be that it allows it to stay in place as a reminder that the sacrifices have been made for longer because it has a little salt in it. And it keeps moisture from getting into the grain. So, there may be some very practical reasons of that, but symbolically, it does point to this idea of purification. And it has symbolically connection to the idea of covenant in the Old Testament. Are you aware of the salt covenant? So, Numbers 18:19. Whatever is set aside from the holy offerings the Israelites present to the Lord, I give to you and your sons and daughters, these are the Levites to whom God is speaking, as your perpetual share. It's an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord for both you and your offspring. 2 Chronicles 13:5. Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt? Now, the scripture doesn't spell out what a salt covenant is. But we know from context in the ancient Near East, there are a couple of things that, to which this could be connected. The first is that we have a lot of records that indicate that to seal a contract, the two parties could ingest salt with one another. Kind of like a handshake. Instead of a handshake deal, you both take a pinch of salt, put it on your tongue, and that's your way of saying this seals this agreement. The other that we know is something known as a salt covenant. And the way that that would work is two parties would come together and they would take a bowl, and each of them would take a little of their own salt and pour it into the bowl together and then mix it around. And then say that this covenant can only be dissolved if we could separate our grains of salt from one another. So it's a way of making a commitment to that covenant that is impossible to take apart. So it could be that some of those are behind these salt covenant references that we find in the Old Testament. So my question then becomes, if salt has a covenantal reference, a sacrificial reference, how does that play into what Jesus is saying here? You are salt. What else does that, how does that add to our layered understanding of what this means? What could Jesus be saying with that?
So one?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Well, I just was going to say, it's to remind us of long-lasting covenant.
Okay.
Long-
It's a reminder of that covenantal faithfulness. Yep. Moses?
So we are to preserve the hearts.
Yep.
That we are here is preserving the heart, and we should also demonstrate it practically.
Right?
We are to flavor the hearts,
Right?
make it better than we meet it.
Right.
Wherever we are, people should see a difference.
Right?
And then we are to preserve, purify, and also purify.
Mm-hmm.
Be the example of righteousness for people to
Okay.
demonstrate and see.
And all of that taken together is being the reminder of God's covenant. These are the people who knew the covenant. These are Israelites. They know the covenant. They understand the idea of covenant and sacrifice. And Jesus is saying, as the kingdom people of God, you are reminders of God's covenantal faithfulness in the world. Now, there are two more things. One is that salt was often used as currency. Did you know that Roman legionnaires were often paid in salt? Which is where we get the phrase, a man's worth his salt. Somebody, well, they're worth their salt. That comes from that practice. And so it was used as currency. It had value. You're salt. You have value in this. You are the salt of the earth. You have value in this earth. And there's one other thing that salt does that nobody's mentioned yet. There's one other thing that salt will do. What's that?
Dissolve.
It'll dissolve.
Make you thirsty.
It will make you thirsty. Long time ago, when I was serving a church in Atlanta, we had a worship service that was designed to be kind of somewhat experimental. It was a different approach entirely. And I was preaching in that service, I was preaching on this passage. And so, in an effort to help people understand kind of what Jesus is talking about with salt, we handed out little salt packets, like those little restaurant salt packets. And we told people to taste them, to taste the salt, so that they could kind of get a feel for what salt, what we were talking about and all that. And, I don't know, sermon went 20 minutes or something from there. And finally, I looked at him, I said, and there's one more thing that salt does, right? And the entire congregation said, makes you thirsty, as in, we're thirsty. And knowing that, we had water for everybody, and so I didn't get fired right then. Our presence in the world is supposed to make other people thirsty. To make them thirsty for the presence of Christ. Frank Stagg, in his commentary on this passage, said that one mark of the redeemed is that they are redeeming. That we're at work on that mission, making people thirsty for the presence of Christ. The other thing I would say is that salt is necessary. It's necessary in our bodies. It regulates a lot of important bodily functions. Cellular transfer of fluid and heart rate and all kinds of things. And if it gets out of balance, you got a big problem. If your sodium gets out of whack, you got a big problem. So it's very important to our bodies. It's very important to the earth and to our ecosystem. Salt is essential. So when Jesus says you are salt, I think all of that to me comes into play. We are adding flavor to the world. We're preserving the world. We're purifying the world. We're a reminder of God's presence in the world. At the same time, we are making people thirsty for Jesus, and we matter. We are, in some sense, the presence of the church preserves creation. Salt. You are salt, he says. But what about this business of the salt loses its saltiness? What does he mean by that? We don't really experience that, right? I mean, in the processed world of salt, we don't really have salt. It doesn't go bad much. It might cake up, but it doesn't really go bad. In the first century, a lot of their salt was from a dehydration process. So they would take seawater, boil it down, and recover the salt. This is in the Galilee, so this is the northern part. Down around the Dead Sea, they just scraped it up off the shoreline because of the salinization of the water. But that salt, harvested that way, does have a tendency to go kind of flat. It doesn't go bad, but it loses its effectiveness. So that was a possibility in Jesus' day. That wasn't something that people would have gone, well, that's never going to happen. It was possible. So what's his point? How do we lose our saltiness? Some people, well, not anybody in here, well, maybe one or two pretty salty, but how do we lose that sense of saltiness? What does that mean?
Your supply of salt's bigger than the demand.
Stale, flat. What'd you say, Dean?
Your supply of salt's bigger than the
The
demand.
supply of salt's bigger than the demand. I think you're on to it. I think the way we lose our saltiness, our effectiveness, because that's really what that's about, right? Is about being effective. It's when we don't get to the earth. You're the salt of the earth, Jesus says. There's a book, and it's decades old now. It was called Out of the Salt Shaker. Any of you ever read that book? I think it was by Rebecca Manley Piper, but the whole concept of that book was that if we're salt, the only way we're effective is if we get out of the salt shaker. If the salt spends all of its time together with the rest of the salt, and we're all just kind of bottled up here together, unless we get out there, there's no effectiveness. We're not being useful in God's kingdom. So the first thing Jesus says is, you are salt. We are made salt by Christ for the sake of God's kingdom's work in the world. You are salt. So, the next one, though, he says, you are light. You are the light of the world. Same question. Why light? What does light do? Helps you see? Yep.
Dispels darkness.
Dispels darkness. Shines.
Think.
It's what?
It helps you think.
It helps you think.
Guides.
Guides.
Brings life.
Brings life. Light is essential to life in the world. Anybody else? All those are good. If those who were sitting there heard Jesus say, you are salt, and went, I don't know what he's talking about. Maybe. When he said, you are light of the world, they knew what that meant. They understood that because they believed themselves as God's people, Israel, in that moment, to be God's light in the world. They understood that to be their role, and they expected that of a coming Messiah. Isaiah 2:2-5. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountains of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Isaiah 42:6. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles. Isaiah 49:6. He says, it is too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and to bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth. Light. If, and we have no evidence that there were that day, but if there had been the learned among Israel there that day, Pharisees, Sadducees, others, they would have liked that statement. They believed themselves to be the keeper of the light. The light in their mind was the wisdom of God. They were those who knew and kept and taught the wisdom of God. But that light belonged to all of Israel, and they understood that part of what their task would become in the Messianic age would be the light to the Gentiles. To share the wisdom of God, the way of God. Did you listen to some of that language about walking the path and follow the way? All of that, to share that with the broader world. So here's Jesus. Kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of God has come. In other words, I am God's chosen who's been sent to you. You are salt. Now it is your time to be light. You are to be the light of the world. Salt of the earth, which connects us back to that first blessing, the poor in spirit, the people of the earth, the Anawim. Salt of the earth, people of the earth, salt of the earth. But the light is to the whole cosmos. It's to everything God created, which includes the Gentiles. The kingdom is here, so now you are the light of the world. And that they probably had some beginning of an understanding of because of what they'd heard from the prophets. But then he qualifies it. With salt, there's just the idea about if you lost your effectiveness, you're not worth much anymore. But with light, there are two other phrases that Jesus uses here. And the first one is what scholars call a proverb impossibilia, which means it's a proverb of the impossible. Jesus says, a city, a town built on a hill cannot be hidden. The wisdom there is in the fact that it's impossible to hide a city that's built on a hill. What city do you think he might be talking about? Jerusalem. That's almost always a good guess when you ask what city in Matthew, because that's always what he's talking about. Matthew uses the site and the name of Jerusalem more than any of the other gospel writers. Because remember, he's writing primarily to Christians with a distinct Jewish heritage. That's why he keeps saying it. This happened so that Scripture might be fulfilled, that these residents of salt and light that are here. The salt of the earth, by the way, that's the only place we find that in the New Testament. It's right here in Matthew and Sermon on the Mount. It's exclusive to Matthew. Light of the world we find in other places. For instance, in John's Gospel, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. So this idea of being light is like a city on a hill, like Jerusalem. And when they went as pilgrims to Jerusalem, they couldn't help but see it from miles off. Anticipate arriving. They knew what this meant. They understood that, yeah, you can't hide that. So that one's pretty obvious. But then the second one says, neither does anyone light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand so that it gives light to everyone in the house. Well, that's kind of a parable too, isn't it? Parable of sorts. Don't hide the light. When I hear this parable, I think of my grandmother. She had coil lamps in her house. I don't know if you all, some of you are not old enough to have seen those and remember those. You have two still? And she had electricity, okay, don't get me wrong. This is the 70s. This is not forever ago. But she kept them because they were family heirlooms. And I always think about that, but that's not what this is. It's not this huge thing. It's these small oil lamps. Have you ever seen a picture of them? They look like Aladdin's lamp, kind of, sort of, with a wick out the end. And they're about this big. And what Jesus is saying, you don't light that and then take what literally here is a meal bowl. And what that was a large, some of you probably have translations that say basket or bushel or just bowl. This was a pretty sizable bowl that they would put grain in and grind the grain with a stone to make meal. Pretty big, pretty heavy. And Jesus is saying, you don't light a lamp and then take this huge bowl and put it over it. And why wouldn't you do that? There's no light, and it'll go out. There's no air. So not only can you not see the light hidden under the bowl, but you actually put the light out if you put a bowl over it like that. And I think that's different a little bit from the way I read this years ago when I was thinking about a bushel basket, because, our bushel baskets have slats and you could still breathe. You see a little light, but not all. This would actually snuff it out. Jesus said, nobody does that. In the same way, he says, you that are light, don't hide. Don't hide. Instead, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. What does Jesus want other people to see in that? It's not tricky. It's right there in the sentence.
Light.
Wants them to see the light expressed how, man?
How we, what?
It's God's presence.
It's
Yeah.
God's presence.
God's presence. And you were about to say it. And how we live.
Yeah.
And in what we do.
In space.
People see your good deeds and they see the light. It's not to see us. You notice that? He doesn't see so that people will see you and what you do and glorify our Father in heaven. He says so that they will see your good deeds and glorify. How many of us do good things all the time for a different reason than that? Why do we do the good things that we do? Ma'am?
To get recognized,
To get recognized,
self-gratification.
self-gratification,
We had success before, we keep on doing
had success before, it worked for us before, so we keep on doing it.
It's just the right thing to do.
Sometimes because it just feels like the right thing to do,
To show grace.
to show grace. I think sometimes we do that. Sometimes we do it to make us feel better about ourselves.
Yes.
I'm going to do this good thing. Do what?
Check a box.
Check a box. What you're supposed to do.
Confirm class.
Sir?
Confirm class.
Yeah? Yeah?
Sometimes it's a quid pro quo.
Sometimes. I'm going to do this good thing for you. You do this good thing for me. I mean, we would never do that with God, would we? We never, no.
We do all the time.
No, we don't do that.
No, and it's all about treating people right because they'll treat you right.
Right? And there's some gospel in that. Jesus says, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. Although he doesn't say do unto others so that they will do unto you. And there's a little difference there. But there is that connection of how we live with other people that's important. For sure. What's the motivation here for doing good deeds? What's Jesus saying?
So that God gets glory.
So that God gets the glory. So people see what you do, it's reflective of the light that is within you, that is the light of Christ, and that points them to God, not to us. And this is part of what, to me, connects this back to these Beatitudes, because they're trying to train us in the way of selflessness. They're trying to train us in this way of emptying of self so that we can be filled with Christ. And it's when that happens, then we can be the light of the world in the way that Jesus is saying. We can do these things so that it points others to Christ. And sometimes it's about checking our motivations. One of the answers at 4 o'clock when I asked this question about what are these Beatitudes doing to you? How do they challenge you? And one person said, well, I'm finding myself asking a lot of questions about why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing it for me, or am I doing it because it's what God would have me do, or where Christ is leading me, or am I doing this for myself? And that's hard to figure out. And it's especially hard to figure out when what you're doing is a good thing. When it's demonstrably good or helpful or compassionate or whatever, it's really hard to figure that out. And that doesn't mean that those things are not of worth or not valuable or not good things to do. But it does challenge us, this does to me, to really consider why we're doing what we're doing. How is it forming us in Christ? The things that we're doing. So, if you take all of that together, if you kind of put all of this being salt and light, and this is kind of an interesting counterweight to some things we're going to pick up later in the sermon, because this is what you might call a double commission. You are these two things. Because later in the sermon, we're going to get pairs of things that don't go together. And it's this set that we're going to go back to time and again to remind us of what we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to live. But if you take all these things together, all the things we said about salt, all the things we've said about light, all the ways that they could talk about how we're to engage in the world as God's people, what does that mean to you? If you try to put it all into one thing, what does it say about how we're to be God's people in the world? One of the answers earlier, one of our members said, well, it sounds like the song, Let Others See Jesus in You. I think it's a pretty good way to get at it. To be Christ in the world. Bonhoeffer, in his book, Cost of Discipleship, when he addresses these verses, he said, this is about us being the visible community of Christ in the world. This is about us representing the kingdom of God in the world every day. Salt and light. The most essential, practical things you can imagine. The things that are the most pervasive. The things that are the most obvious. The things that have the most lasting effect. To the extent that we are these representatives, that we are that kind of kingdom people in the world every day, that starts to lead to the kind of change that Christ has come to bring, the kind of transformation that Christ offers us. So with verse 17, scholars say, okay, well, this seems to be a whole section from 3 to 17. The Beatitudes, this salt and light commission, and they call it, this is the fancy word that, you can use this in trivia somewhere sometime if you need it. But they call this first section the exordium. It means it's the opening exhortation in which Jesus is really defining his audience. He's really saying, as the people of God, this is who you are. This is how you're supposed to live in the world. And with that established, now I'm going to teach you what I want to teach you. He's talking to them about this is who you are to be, how you are to live. Now let me start to unpack that for you. So as we look to next week, we start to get Jesus' unpacking of the law and how he's come to fulfill the law and what that really means for us. So that's where we'll pick up next week. I hope you're still reading every week, taking 10 minutes. It's just 10 minutes to read the Sermon on the Mount through every week. I think it really is helpful to get that rhythm in you, to begin to see how it all fits together.